You're listening to WPWC We Act Radio, 1480 AM, weactradio.com.
To Pivot Point, a show bringing you diverse views on the news. I'm your host, Maya Rockeymoore. Big news this week, the Florida State Legislature passed a budget that failed to include funding for Medicaid expansion, effectively denying 1.3 million Floridians access to health care. With this move, Florida joins 24 other states that have said no or are leaning towards denying Medicare coverage and the health care coverage to low-income Americans who were promised expanded coverage through the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act that was signed into law in 2014. Florida's decision is especially damning given the number of older adults in that state who rely on Medicaid to help offset the costs of health care. As my listeners should know, many older adults are eligible for both Medicaid and Medicare. And because they are so low income that they cannot afford the out-of-pocket health care costs that are associated with Medicare. And so with that, in addition to the thousands of younger families who will be shut out of the health care system in Florida, these older adults, also known as dual eligibles, will be disadvantaged by the legislature's decision. Given that the state's decision may literally mean the difference between life and death for poor Florida residents, it's worth taking a moment to understand why state governments have become what I call healthcare refuseniks. After all, it's not like it makes economic sense. The federal government has offered to pick up 100% of the costs of Medicaid expansion in the first 3 years of the Affordable Care Act's implementation, and 90% of the costs thereafter. Analysts of all political stripes have admitted that this is a win-win-win proposition for low-income residents who get access to health care, many of them for the first times in their adult lives. For states worried about their budgets, this has a positive net effect on their Medicaid costs. And for county governments they're often the ones who have to actually pick up the costs for uncompensated care at the county level through county hospitals for the uninsured. And so it's this last factor that should really give us pause, and it should raise alarms about the future of health care for low-income populations. For the Affordable Care Act also phases out what they call disproportionate share payments to county hospitals that have that disproportionate burden of caring for the uninsured. It is likely that without Medicaid expansion and without the disproportionate share payments to help offset the cost of uncompensated care, many county hospitals will go out of business, leaving a huge hole in the healthcare safety net in many states. Ultimately, the burden of paying for the uninsured will likely be shifted to other parts of the healthcare system, including, by the way, private hospitals. The decision to deny care to the poor only makes sense when filtered through a political lens. Even though President Obama won the state with the narrowest of margins in the 2012 elections, 10 out of Florida's 27 representatives in the House of Representatives are Republican, and its state legislature is Republican-controlled. When all is said and done, Florida and other states are making their decisions not in terms of what's best for their residents, not in terms of what's best for their economies, but in terms of political advantage. And this, folks, is where we're at when it comes to the state of our leadership in this nation. We have a great show for you today. Garland Nixon, a radio host, WPFW. John Burbank, Executive Director of the Economic Opportunity Institute. We're going to have them on to talk to us about where we are in terms of our national leadership. Then we'll go to a conversation about Pete Peterson, the billionaire who has been buying the Washington conversation about the future of our nation with regards to deficit and debt and what should be done about that. And then we'll be joined by Maria Roach, an activist, a producer, an organizer who has been keeping up with the latest on the impact of sequestration on communities across the country. And then we'll be joined by Ernie Powell of Ernie Powell's Grassroots Corner, who will, of course, as you well know, be talking about to us about organizing and the state of play on the upcoming Peterson Summit, as well as the latest as what's in terms of what's happening at the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. And so with that, I'd like to welcome Garland Nixon and John Burbank on the line. Garland, welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
John, are you with us?
I am. Thank you very much.
John, you recently wrote a piece for the Huffington Post talking about change.
Correct.
Or the lack thereof. Can you give us your thesis?
Well, I was talking more about rhetoric and how rhetoric is used to win elections, but unfortunately doesn't necessarily prevail in terms of policymaking. And so you have elements of, for example, like building the middle class out that President Obama used in terms of his campaign. But at the same time, you have him suggesting that we cut Social Security benefits through the imposition of the chain CPI. Mm-hmm. And if there's anything that actually hurts the middle class most, it is something like that. In fact, when you think about our retirement security system, which is pretty much in tatters, the only thing that most people can depend upon is Social Security, and therefore we should be thinking about ways of enhancing and improving benefits for Social Security to make up for the dismal shape that people's retirement savings are in right now.
Garland,
that's what we could do in terms of...
there must be some kind of a technical glitch. I'm not hearing our other guests, but that's okay for now, if someone can get that straight.
Great, thank you. Basically, Garland, what John just mentioned was the fact that you have the difference between rhetoric and policy, and that President Obama has actually said a lot of great things during the election with regards to being progressive in terms of the issues, particularly when it comes to the middle class. But then when it comes to the policies like the chain CPI that he recently introduced as a part of his 2014 budget, that what you actually have are policies that actually hurt the middle class. And so, Garland, my question for you is, one of the biggest applause lines in the President's State of the Union address was his line talking about that he was going to protect Social Security and Medicare, and yet we have the imposition, the proposed imposition of the chain CPI and other proposed cuts to Medicare. So how do you actually reconcile those two, the rhetoric versus the reality of the policy?
Well, two things. Number one, and I recognize that if we go back to FDR, we got some wonderful policies from him, but we also got detention camps for Japanese. If we go back to LBJ, we've got the Great Society, but we also got the Vietnam War. So the first thing I'd say is I recognize that even at your very best with a president, you're going to get some things that you really don't like. That's the reality of politics. Number one, but I also think I tend to believe to some extent, I know, and I'm sure, most of our listeners know by now, that if the president says, I'm going to give you X, whatever it may be, but I require some form of revenue, it's absolutely not going to happen. I know it, and I'm sure that he knows it. So I have to suspect to some extent that he already knows when he says this, that it's not going to happen. I may be wrong in that, in thinking that it's somewhat strategic or tactical. Or maybe it's even wishful thinking, but I certainly am going to suspect that the president is at least as politically wise, probably much more so than I, and he knows that chain CPI is not going to happen simply because of the politics of the House. So maybe he's doing it saying, look, I'll do this to say I went this far, but they wouldn't come to me, knowing they're not going to come to him.
John, we actually have a president who has not only imposed or proposed the chain CPI, but has kept Guantanamo Bay open, has kept the Bush-era drone program going. So when Garland talks about this whole notion that you have some things you like and some things you don't. Do you feel as if we're getting some things that we like out of this administration? And what do you think about the idea that it's a tactic, a political tactic?
Well, I think we first have to acknowledge that the most important thing I think that's happened in terms of policy was the Affordable Care Act and passage of the Affordable Care Act. So that is the first thing that we have to acknowledge. As flawed as it may be, it is really on the road to getting to universal coverage. So that's a good thing. But when you talk about the chain CPI and saying it's okay to propose it because the other side won't agree to it, you've essentially moved the goalpost into the opponent's territory. What we should really be talking about is enhancing benefits. And in terms of the president, he's not up for re-election, but a lot of other Democrats are up for re-election. And I can assure you that the Republicans will hang the chain CPI proposal around their necks unless they are very, very strong in disavowing it. And that doesn't mean the Republicans don't want it. They do want to take apart Social Security, but as a political campaign and as an electoral tactic, it makes sense just to attack Democrats if they are seen as diminishing Social Security. So it doesn't. To me, it's a lose all the way around.
And Garland, what do you see as the political advantage of actually basically imposing a chain CPI that hurts the middle class, that hurts working class Americans? And does this not actually strengthen the hands of all future politicians who may want to cut Social Security? They can point to Obama as being the Trojan horse who opened that door.
I certainly, I'm certainly agreeing with the other gentleman on almost all points there. While I am attempting to, take it apart and understand it, and as I said, maybe some of it is, trying to make the best of it, the best of this, look at it in the most favorable fashion. I agree that it's bad that's a door that you've opened a door now. So you've created an opportunity for people for our citizens, maybe even, to see this as an option, to see Social Security or Medicare as, a vulnerable program. So, I'm in agreement with that. I think it was a really, really bad move on so many fronts. And, I am hoping and praying that we don't see the day that, particularly a Democrat, because keep in mind, a Republican could never touch Medicare or could never really do much at this point with Medicare or Social Security. They would have to have a Democrat in office in order to get it changed. So let's just hope it doesn't happen.
And so actually, I want to push back on that and ask, why do you think they proposed it? I mean, I know that they've been angling for a grand bargain since 2009. I know that, he almost gave away the baby with the bathwater back during the debt ceiling debates in the first term. But we're now in the second term, and there are many people who believed that a second-term Obama administration would be like Superman, that he would take off his shirt and there would be a big S underneath or a big O, and that he would be more progressive in terms of addressing everything from jobs to, you name it. And so, it just strikes me that if John is arguing that it's a lose-lose-lose politically, why propose something like that?
We have to keep this in mind too. I mean, if we get away from the actual motives of why he would do it and just look at what happened, if we don't say why, we say what. We can look at a number of instances where the president has clearly drifted to the center and even probably across the center to the right. I mean, we can look at some instances where Bill Clinton did. There are a number of times when we have a Democratic president, a Democrat in office, and we see them drift ideologically too far in one direction. There are some areas where I've seen the president drift ideologically way further to the right than I am comfortable with. He has been far too much of a deficit hawk. And needless to say, when it comes to the Social Security and kind of offering it up here for sacrifice, I have to say, regardless of why, ideologically, that's on the right side of the fence, and I don't like it. That being said, I'm not condemning him, saying I'm just going to throw the president out and he's the worst person in the world. I think you get what you can get out of him, and the things that you don't like, such as this, you challenge him.
Right. So, John, a president can't actually do it on his own. He does have to have a Congress that is willing to cooperate on an agenda. And we do know that the Republicans in Congress have been intransigent. Now, in one respect, we're basically happy about that because it has been the Republican intransigence that has disallowed the grand bargain to move forward, meaning that they are the ones who have kept us from having cuts to these Social Security programs because they don't want a deal. Don't want to enter into a deal with the president. Yet on the other hand, on everything from, guns, gun control to, any of the great ideas that actually have been proposed by the Obama administration, like investing in infrastructure, like expanding Head Start, we're not seeing much interest in actually governing, are we?
No, absolutely not. The Republicans are not interested in having a successful government. They are ideologically opposed to government, at least to government in which you're addressing the needs of a democracy. They like the idea of government to favor the largest corporations. We know that. That's fine. But even to me, that's still not an excuse to, in some ways, in little cat's feet, mimic their agenda. So it doesn't make any sense to me to, for example, to propose a change CPI, even if you know that they won't accept it. Because if you actually propose it, then they can come back and say, well, you proposed a change CPI, so we could just do that. We don't need to worry about revenue. Right. I actually think that the president lost he gave away all his cards in December. If he had refused to agree to the Republicans' demands regarding the Bush tax cuts and had just done nothing, then we would have returned to the pre-Bush tax rates automatically on earned income, on unearned income, and then he could have dealt from a position of strength in terms of saying, okay, now let's do a tax cut or a tax rebate to families under $100,000. That would have made a lot more sense politically. It would have made a lot more sense fiscally. It would have provided the monies to do some of the infrastructure that the president is talking about.
And you could have dealt with actually eliminating the sequestration as a part of that deal.
Absolutely. It wouldn't have been there. But in some ways, he owns the sequestration now. He agreed to it back in, 2011? And by doing these partial exemptions, it just gets worse. So essentially, poor people and middle-class people are left out, but we got to make sure that those people can get through their airports on time to get on their planes. So I unfortunately, I think that the direction is going in the wrong direction. And in regards to Social Security and the president's stance, I think we all remember that awful first debate against Mitt Romney, in which the president said that he and Mr. Romney had basically the same opinion about Social Security. And unfortunately, I think he was speaking the truth to that. We just didn't want to believe it.
We didn't want to believe it, but he was speaking the truth. Garland, it's the Democrats actually own the Bush tax cuts now because as a result of that December deal, they helped make permanent. In fact, it was their votes that actually made permanent the Bush-era tax cuts for 99.3% of Americans. And so, I mean, where do we go from here? What do you think the state of the Democratic Party is right now? Have they lost their credibility on traditional issues that they had historically been strong on? And what do you see the midterm elections looking like?
Well, I certainly see the midterm elections. I mean, the Republicans, number one, have drawn this country, the districts in a fashion that has basically given us two countries. I mean, they've given us a lot of districts that are pretty much 100% red, which culturally really changes things in this country because there's not much of a mix. There's the right and the left. So I don't think they have a lot of interest in governing. As far as the Republicans, I think they've got bigger fish to fry. I mean, culturally speaking, Republicans are averse to any type of change, number one, and they have a very powerful belief in a hierarchical society. And number one, the president represents change just by being an African American and certainly represents a major challenge, if not the total destruction of a class system or a hierarchical society just by being a person who, according to the traditional hierarchy in America would be at the bottom of the totem pole and being at the top. But I think the Democrats right now, I think people look at government and see that it's frozen. You can only, like a team of horses can only run as fast as their slowest horse. And right now, I personally believe the Tea Party is the slowest horse, and they slowed our team down. And I don't know, in reality, what the Democrats would do if there was, in fact, a government that actually could function to pass some sort of legislation, unlike the one that we have now that can only, kind of free up the airports on a Friday when they got to fly home.
John, the Democrats in the 2012 midterms, what is your take?
They need to disavow the chain CPI.
Mm-hmm.
And you made a very good point that a lot of progressive Democrats actually enabled the permanent tax decrease by their votes in December. Anyway, I think that it's important that they need to disavow the chain CPI and basically do talk about things that make a difference for middle-class families. Higher education, tuition, full funding of public education, which is more of a state issue than a national issue, but important, obviously. The need for jobs, the need for the expansion of healthcare coverage, and for the full flowering and implementation of the Affordable Care Act.
John, we actually have progressive advocacy organizations threatening to run primaries against Democrats behind that December vote, behind stated leadership support for a chain CPI. I'm wondering, have we gotten to a point of a civil war in the Democratic Party with regards to the future direction of the party?
I don't think so. I'm not at that point yet. I think a lot of Democrats want to work together. There's significant disagreements, obviously. President Obama is our president, and so we need to figure out how we can work with him and what issues we can work with him, and we also need to be able to be forthright when we disagree with him. But that, to me, does not mean that the Democratic Party has to be riven with disputations and warfare.
Garland, where do we go in 2016? I mean, does this more conservative Obama presidency enable a future, more progressive kind of candidate like Governor Martin O'Malley of Maryland? Or do we see a Hillary Clinton who is, I think, in the same space ideologically, taking the lead?
Well, with the way the way things work now, money-wise, I think that, yes, if Hillary runs, we definitely do see a Hillary. That mountain of cash that she'll have, it will be insurmountable, in my opinion. There is certainly, and the thing about it is this. There is an element within the Democratic Party, me included, that's always angry in one way or another if the Democrats are unhappy. But I think strategically, Democrats tend to be more strategically rational and recognize when we're going to tear our party apart and hand it over to the Republicans. We tend to be just like we tend to accept science more. We tend more or less likely to do something that's going to be counterproductive to all of our needs and progressive policies. Whereas I think the Republicans tend to be less strategically rational. So I think they're more likely to tear their party to shreds with primaries than we are. But the money says, the big money says, not only are we going to stay where we are, we're probably going to drift more towards the right, and we're probably going to drift more towards the corporate power and more towards wealth as opposed to prosperity. I mean, that's the way the money system works now, and I don't see the political machine that we have, I don't see that changing anytime soon, and I say that, unfortunately, very cynically.
John, I'm going to let you have the last word for this segment, he's basically, Garland just said that, it's the road that we've been on is going to continue. Do you see that not happening?
I like to look at the emerging majorities, which I think will make a fundamental difference, both not just in social policy, but in economic policy over the next decade. And it means that there will be fewer proportionally people like me, white males, and more people of color who are voting and who are actually helping to design and demand policy that benefits the broad middle class of which they are. And so I see great hope in terms of our democracy because we have this terrific multi-ethnic country which is becoming more and more multi-ethnic and is empowering more and more people over time. So in the long run, I think we have things to be hopeful for. And in the short run, our goal is to make sure we have the policies ready for enabling this shift of power, and then when the shift of power comes forward, to be able to put our policies into place.
From your lips to God's ears, because I'll tell you what, it could either go that way or we could become apartheid South Africa. And I'll tell you what, none of us will want to live in a country like that.
That's exactly right.
All right. Thank you, Garland. Thank you, John. John, will you be staying with us after the break?
I have.
Okay.
I don't think so. I'll see if I can. But,
all right. All right. Thank you very much. I
Thanks a lot.
appreciate both of you. All right.
Thank you, and to get you on my show sometime also.
I look forward to it.
All right. Thank you.
All right.
You
Bye-bye.
are listening to Maya Rockeymoore, hosted by the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. Join us after the break as we talk about Pete Peterson's summit and how he's bought Washington.
This is John Bauman. You know me best as Bowser, formerly of the group Sha Na Na. And you know, when we were rocking and rolling all those years ago, I wasn't particularly worrying about my retirement or how I'd pay for health care. But now that I'm 65, I really understand the importance of Medicare. Not just for myself, but for generations of working Americans who need secure health care as they get older. That's why this election is so important. The Romney-Ryan Coupon Care Plan will mean the end of traditional Medicare. It gives seniors a partial payment which loses value over time and raises our health care costs as much as $500 more each month. Coupon Care also puts us at the mercy of private insurers, making it harder to pick our own doctors. All of this to pay for tax cuts for the wealthy? Are you kidding me? Americans of all ages, say no to Coupon Care. Bum 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 dang a dang dang ding a dong ding. Preserve Medicare.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.
Welcome back to Pivot Point. I am your host, Maya Rockeymoore, and it is my pleasure to welcome for the very first time ever new radio host extraordinaire, journalist, activist, organizer, and producer, Maria Roach. Welcome, Maria.
Maya, thank you. That's a wonderful introduction.
Well, I'll tell you what, we have been following the issue of sequestration here on this show. Many of our callers and listeners know that we have, since the very beginning, have been predicting that sequestration would have a negative impact on communities across the country. But in the national news media, there's kind of been a deflated reaction saying that sequestration really hasn't had the negative impact that was projected.
Right.
What's your take?
Well, first of all, when you Google sequestration, there is a precipitous drop-off from February to May. And that shows that not only is the media not covering sequestration to the amount that they were back in February, but Americans, too, aren't interested, aren't curious, aren't digging in to figure out how does this impact me? And I think that's the issue. Really, it goes to impact. Today, just doing a little bit of digging, putting on my investigative journalism hat, the cuts were split evenly. We could all say, back when this was created, that you had Republicans who gave up a certain amount for defense and Democrats who gave up a certain amount for non-defense spending. And the thinking back at that time was that we were all going to feel the pain evenly. But if you look at impact, cutting millions of dollars from one defense project does not have the same impact as cutting millions of dollars from Meals on
Start.
Wheels
Or
or
Meals on Wheels.
Head Start
Right.
or funding for Medicaid. So if you just look at $1 million, cutting $1 million from a Defense Department contract would be a wheel, a tire. Cutting $1 million from Head Start means children aren't receiving the education, that children aren't getting meals.
But
And so,
have we heard that kind of outcry?
no.
To be frank with you, these are things that were predicted when sequestration was first implemented, and yet you don't see a groundswell of opposition from Head Start leaders across the country saying that this is having a devastating impact on Head Start programs. You don't see this groundswell from the Meals on Wheels providers in states across the country, even though we know that they've taken a huge hit. That senior programs that were financed through the Older Americans Act have taken a huge hit. And so, what is happening? And yet, who have we heard from? We heard from the air traffic control people.
Right. Right.
And who organized themselves to say that the cuts were going to devastate their operations and was going to cause long, huge lines in airports. And then they moved and got an exemption from sequestration.
Right.
So what's going on?
I think you hit the nail on the head. The issue really is power and powerlessness. And when you're talking about low-income individuals, they're struggling to literally put meals on the table. So they don't have the capacity to lobby. They don't have the money. They don't have the time. Their hands are tied. And so they just continue to struggle. We're talking about millions of Americans who are already beaten down. We're in a down economy. We're in a double-dip recession, some would say. They're beaten down, and to now expend the energy is more than they can do. And that's why a year ago, I said, this is something wrong. This system is broken. And I left my career as a television producer to bring to bear the experience that I have to organize, to tell personal stories, to inspire people to say, you know what, we do have power. I wrote a petition last year, right after Trayvon Martin was shot and killed, because I thought the parents would not be able to fly up to Washington and to lobby Eric Holder to do something. The Attorney General needed to step in and look at the investigation by the Sanford police, which I thought was botched. I have 2 little black boys, and I could empathize with Trayvon's mother. I could imagine how she must have felt for 2 days not knowing where her son was. And I thought, as a mother, as an American, I can do something. And I think right now, those who can need to help those who can't. I think we need to petition. We need to give them a voice. The lobbyists, the Defense Department, the Lockheed Martins and the Boeings, they have multi-billion-dollar budgets to get their message heard. But the poor, the cancer patients, the mothers and fathers who are struggling to educate their children, they don't have the means. And so that's why we live in an age now where we have so many online tools to organize. And that's what I am really hoping, that we will take these stories, the ones that we're talking about, the people who aren't receiving their meals, and share these stories and inspire people. Speak up. Go to weactradio.com. Email us. Tell us your stories. We're here for you because we are empowered to do something.
Well, it's interesting because this week I was invited to Pittsburgh to speak to the Western Pennsylvania Association of Older Adults. These are organizations where they're providers of services to older Americans. Everything from the Meals on Wheels to the services that help them to sign up for programs that they're eligible for, et cetera. And I asked the audience, I said, how many of you have spoken and reached out to your member of Congress? How many of you have signed on to a sign-on letter to your congressional delegation? Less than a third.
Yeah.
And these are the organizations
Yes.
that actually run these programs, that know the stories, that know the programs, and should be a bridge builder between the populations of need and the power elite who are making decisions about these programs. And yet, less than a third of those organizations actually have been engaged in the political process. Is that malpractice? I mean, should they be considering themselves advocates of the first order, not just service providers, but advocates?
I think the reality is, Maya, and that is such a great illustration of the problem, is that you can't stop learning. You can't stop fighting. I did not expect 540,000 people to sign my petition.
Wow.
I had no experience. I literally was just a blank slate sitting in my robe, but mad. And tears are streaming down my face. I was mad. And I tell my story time and time again to illustrate the fact that one person can inspire thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands. One person wrote the petition, and Trayvon's mother and father joined in. Over 1 million people signed it. I think by now it's almost 2 million people.
Oh, that's great.
But it was a college student. He
Right.
didn't know Trayvon. He didn't know Sabrina Fulton, but he just thought this is wrong.
So, are you suggesting, Maria, that all of these populations of need that have been hit by sequestration need to have a super advocate in a robe with a computer to write a petition for them? Or are you suggesting that there is some other form of organizing that needs to be done to help them bring their voices fully to bear on the process?
I think a robe and a computer is a good start. But I think there are many really great organizations too who are really doing the hard work, but they need to hear from people who are affected. I think we are at a time where all you have to do is get on Twitter and put in sequester, and you see some of the great organizations. Facebook, social media has been very empowering for people who just haven't felt that their voices were being heard. And I am really pleased to hear from these voices, and I'm really delighted to be here at We Act Radio on Wednesdays, helping to tell the stories, but even more importantly, connecting those in need to great organizers.
I have to go here because I go here with every guest that I have on, but as you well know, the president is actually arguing that there is a path out of sequestration. He calls it a balanced approach, that we can get ourselves out of sequestration by actually having a dollar in cuts to entitlement programs like Social Security and Medicare in exchange for $1 in revenue increases to wealthier Americans. That's the general approach. And yet, what do we know about $1 in cuts to Social Security and Medicare beneficiaries versus $1 in revenue increases for wealthy individuals? I think that you mentioned it earlier. It's not the same thing.
Not the same thing. Here's just a little something I want to read to you. I was looking on Forbes.com, and we know who Forbes' audience is. It's not as Mitt Romney calls it, the 47%. But there was a great headline that struck me, and what it says is, take that sequestration, Lockheed profits surges as it returns $832 million to shareholders. So while we have the elderly and cancer patients and children struggling to receive this important care, you have shareholders from Lockheed Martin who are holding fistful of cash. Oh, buy that other Mercedes-Benz. Don't worry about us. We'll deal with our healthcare issues. We're just the lowly 47%. That 47% did not vote Mitt Romney into office. They voted President Obama into office. I hope that they will send emails, make phone calls to the White House and say, remember us? We're the one who gave you a job. Protect our jobs, protect our health care, protect our education, feed our elderly. We are America. That's the least that we can do, is to take care of our veterans.
So, I need to check on this before I make the claim, but, it could very well be that Lockheed Martin, at least many of the other multinational corporations who are making a killing with the stock market going up and who are making a killing even as the rest of the nation suffers, have actually, as a part of the Fix the Debt Coalition and as a part of the Business Roundtable, have been arguing for actually cutting Social Security and Medicare benefits, even though some of those companies don't even offer their own employees retirement and health care benefits, which is just a travesty in and of itself.
Indeed.
Because it's actually gross and sickening and disgusting that we have companies in this country who are actually getting tax rebates, not paying any taxes, getting a refund from the federal government, and then recommending that we pay down the debt on the backs of orphans, disabled individuals, and very low-income seniors. It's disgusting. But with that, the question of organizing, I used to work on Capitol Hill, and I've seen the petitions come in. I've, been in offices where the calls have rolled in. And yet I believe that, I'm wondering how effective it is.
It's a very good question. And I would say that the Newtown families have been role models for effective organizing. And Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, the petitions are a good start, but then you take that energy and you build upon it and you go to the town halls. I would pray that no one has to lose a child or a parent in order to feel angry enough to go to the town halls. Let's go to the town halls. Let's speak to our elected officials before we get to the point that we're seeing families losing loved ones because they don't have the chemotherapy drugs. That children are dropping out of schools because they're not receiving the meals to help them to learn and get an education. I have my twin sister is a cancer patient, and it's very real, the impact that not being turned away from your doctor because they won't take any more Medicaid or Medicare patients. That's real. And we're not talking about this affecting one American. We're talking about the ripple effect. She's a mother. She's a wife. Yeah, I think for too many of us, we allowed Congress to sell us a bad bill of goods. $45 billion from defense and $45 billion from non-defense spending. It's just a number to them, and they're pushing it from one column to the other. But for Americans, it's real lives. That if you aren't giving a child the benefit of a good meal, you aren't giving that child the benefit of an education. Our prison population is growing. Guns and prisons in America are growth industries. Am I the only person who thinks that's wrong and immoral? I think I would say to some people who are, Bible-thumping fiscal conservatives that Jesus didn't say to the defense contractor, "Well done." He praised the widow who gave out of her poverty. And I think sometimes we don't hold people's feet to the fire when we're talking about these issues, that you are saying one thing, but then calling something else immoral. I think there's going to be some surprises at the pearly gates. And it's Sunday, so I think that we can go there on a Sunday.
Maria, with many of these prison industry companies being traded on Wall Street, I think that they say well done when their stock goes up, and they don't give two pieces of anything about the people that they're trafficking in. With that, thank you, Maria Roach. Can you give us your website?
I certainly can. It's stateofplaynews.com. And please join me here at We Act Radio on Wednesdays at 11, where we'll be talking about these issues with some of the organizers who are working to make a difference, who will give you advice on what you can do in your own communities. It's time for us to do something. We're letting too much be done to us.
Not for us. Thank you, Maria Roach. You are listening to Pivot Point with Maya Rockeymoore, sponsored by the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. We'll be right back after the break.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.
Social Security and Medicare. These programs touch the lives of virtually every American family. Yet with so much misinformation out there, Americans are pretty confused about their future. You deserve the truth. For more than 30 years, the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare has been leading the fight to preserve our nation's most successful programs. Join us and find out how to keep Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid strong for all generations. Learn more online at thetruthnow.org.
This is John Bauman. You know me best as Bowser, formerly of the group Sha Na Na. These days, I'm rocking and rolling nationwide as part of the Truth Tour with the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. Some politicians claim they want to protect Medicare, but the truth is they support the Romney-Ryan Coupon Care Plan, which would end traditional Medicare. This could raise our health care costs as much as $500 more each month. Ending Medicare doesn't protect it. Learn the facts and join our national campaign at thetruthnow.org.
Welcome back to Pivot Point. I am your host, Maya Rockeymoore, and I'm very pleased to be joined by two august individuals today. Alex Lawson, the Executive Director of Social Security Works, and also a co-founder of We Act Radio. And also, we are joined by Ernie Powell of Ernie Powell's Grassroots Corner. Welcome, Alex and Ernie.
Good to be here.
Good to be here.
Our good buddy, Peter G. Peterson, multi-billionaire, friends of FOB, friends of Bill Clinton, is back in town this week. What's going on, Alex?
Well, Pete Peterson, I'm pretty sure all of your listeners and viewers know him already. He's the Wall Street billionaire. He made $3 billion basically raiding private pension funds in the 80s. They called them overvalued assets. And then he dedicated $1 billion of that to raiding or destroying the public pension fund, Social Security. And he has a regular summit in D.C. He brings together folks from both parties and a lot of elite media, and they basically just tell a story to scare people about the state of America's finances. So you have a Wall Street billionaire scaring America into believing that there's some sort of debt crisis and that the only way out of it is to cut Social Security and Medicare benefits. And that's happening this Tuesday. It's an annual occurrence, and this Tuesday he's going to have another one. As you said, President Clinton is going to be there. There's going to be members of both parties there. And I actually think more insidious is that he always has the elite media host the panels, right? So he has the media figures who you'll see on the Sunday shows talking about it and saying things like, well, everybody knows that Social Security is going bankrupt. Right. And he has them hosting the panel. So. Right.
So, Ernie, it struck me, there was a retrospective on the Iraq War because we reached a critical milestone in the history, the anniversary of it. And it struck me that the deficit hawks that are pushing this mythical narrative about the need to cut Social Security and Medicare because of the debt is the same kind of mythical narrative that drove us to a false war in Iraq. It's the same kind of game plan. And so what do you say?
It's been the drumbeat since both programs started. Mm-hmm. I mean, when they started it, when Social Security was passed in the mid-30s, they said it's going to make the country, it's going to go bankrupt very quickly. The same was said about Medicare. It's their constant refrain. It's their constant refrain even when their own allies say something different. Cato Institute, the America Heritage Foundation, they all talk about the fact that Social Security is not going bankrupt. ARP says that it's not going bankrupt. Social Security itself says it's not going bankrupt. The Affordable Care Act extended solvency for Medicare by about 10 years. But it is what works. And the reason why it works is because they use the logic of what they call the family budget. They say American families don't go into debt. American families only spend what they earn, which is not really true because I don't know a lot of people that bought their house on cash, right, nor their car. But they spin this kind of an austerity mentality, and they use it as a basis by which to frighten people. And the other reason they do it that way is because they don't have the integrity nor the intellectual sense, if you will, to take on what they really feel about the programs. I think most of these people on the conservative side believe that Social Security and Medicare are just not a good idea. They don't think that's the best way to govern, that's the best way for the economy to be handled. But they don't take it on because these programs are so successful and they're so popular that their fallback and their most effective argument is this austerity argument, the scare tactics that Alex was talking about.
But
Yeah.
Alex, go ahead.
Just on that point, because I think you made a really great point that how much it looks like the drumbeat into the Iraq War, where they set up this very scary picture, right? They set up the smoking gun in the form of a mushroom cloud. And then they say, and the only way out of it is invading Iraq, even though there's a multitude of voices that were out there that were saying this doesn't make sense. We have more, there's a lot of options out there, but specifically the elite media lined up behind that, right? And they were the ones who really said, checked that box and said, yes, there's this crisis, and the only way we can deal with it is this. And it's the playbook that I see them using on this one as well.
And yet 10 years later, the elite media are doing many mea culpas, saying that, yes, I guess we were fooled on that one. But, I mean, can you imagine if these folks are successful in taking down Social Security and Medicare? I mean, there are not going to be enough mea culpas in the world to cover the level of human need that's going to be made apparent by the fact that you have starving seniors, disabled individuals, children, and others who are actually suffering, human suffering,
Right.
as a result of these decisions.
Poverty rates for American seniors right now are somewhere within the range of 11 to 13%. Because of the recession, because of other economic factors, they've gone up in the last 10 years. Not a lot, but they've gone up. Without Social Security, older Americans would be at 35% poverty rate.
Or before Social Security, it was 1 and 2.
Right.
I mean, before
Right.
Social Security, there was a poorhouse in every single state except New Mexico. They locked the doors of those poorhouses at night, right? And that's the world that I think billionaires like Pete Peterson want to go back to. What's his name? Walker actually said it accidentally. I like it when they accidentally say the truth.
Right.
And he said they should bring back debtors' prisons, right?
Oh, that's crazy.
They're talking about a Dixonian Little Dorrit universe that they all want to bring America to.
But why is that so nostalgic for them? What is in it for them to have people in desperate, scrabbling poverty?
Bob Dylan said something very interesting many years ago. He said, money doesn't talk, it curses. Number one, they want to keep their money, and they want to get more. That's the nature of their avaristic intentions.
So, Alex, are they winning? Because up to 85% of the American people are not buying the argument. When you look at the polls on Social Security and Medicare, they don't believe that they should be cut to pay down the debt and deficit.
And I think that the answer is I don't think they're winning, but they do have a chance of winning because they're not trying to convince the American people. They're trying to scare the American people and convince the people with power that they have to pull the lever and make this hard choice. And we've all seen this over the course of years. It's just one after another, right? First, it was it's increasing the deficit, so we have to cut Social Security and Medicare. And then they were like, okay, all right, it doesn't actually contribute to the deficit. You caught us. So then they said, oh, well, we're all living longer, so we have to increase the retirement age. And then they're like, all right, you caught us again. We're not all living longer. Just rich people are living longer. So let's make a technical change to more accurately reflect inflation. And so it's each time the American people, when they get savvy to what's going on, when we can cut through their words and say what they're trying to do is take your benefits that you earned over a lifetime of hard work, the American people raise their voices, the people in power get scared, and they don't pull the lever. I think, and this is just my personal prediction, that this is the last one of Obama's presidency. The chain CPI and this next grand bargain attempt is the last one that we have to face down, because just then right after that is the 2014 election. They're not going to do it then. And then the last 2 years of his presidency, I don't think are going to be spent on the grand bargain. So I think we just need to be vigilant, shows like yours and the work that we all do to make sure the American people understand chain CPI, superlative CPI, however they dress it up, it's a benefit cut, and it's our benefits that they're cutting. They're taking our benefits.
So really it's about ginning up education amongst the general population and basically making sure that they're activated and speaking up and speaking out to their congresspeople.
It's about organizing. It's about organizing and educating. It's also about confronting politicians and making them speak as close as they can come to the truth. It's also about finding public venues to debate these issues, and because when we debate these issues on the substance, we win them.
Right.
Because these programs really did work. They really did cure poverty. They really did extend lifelines to people. They really did deliver a form of insurance for health care that seniors never got before 1965.
That's right.
So it's a shame we have to do these things, but it's political life in this country.
And so what kind of actions are taking place around this week's summit in Washington?
And this week is actually an exciting week that all of us are working on a couple things. Around the fiscal summit, I think it's a simple action because all we have to do, Pete Peterson and his elite cronies, they get all the media there. We just need to make sure that we have our people there and we have our message there so that the media can at least tell both sides of the story so that Pete Peterson doesn't have the monopoly on the news cycle that day.
I got to admit to the listening audience that I was actually there for the summit that happened 2 years ago, and I spoke out in front, and there were a host of cameras out there, but I didn't recall seeing any coverage come out of.
There was coverage, actually, the way I phrase it is we got the third and seventh paragraph in every 8-paragraph story on it. And that, I think is great and in exactly what you were doing, speaking truth to power right outside the venue. The cameras really just had to come outside, film some of it, and then we got a B-roll piece. In the news, it's like, but not everybody agreed with Mr. Peterson outside, and then our part of the story. I think this year, though, we have enough people who understand what's going on, who are we're going to be able to actually take the story. We're not going to just take the third and seventh paragraph. We're going to take the headline and the lead.
Ernie, any last words with regards to direction on organizing? Does the National Committee have a site up or anything like that?
Well, I would urge your audience to go to the National Committee website. That's www.ncpssm.org. And there's a Get Involved section there. We're building committees. We're building groups all over the country, a congressional district leadership system. We'll be doing actions during, not only on Tuesday as part of the coalition that Alex was talking about, but also all through the Memorial Day recess. The key is to get involved.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Ernie, for an exciting segment. And thanks to my listening audience and watching audience for yet another edition of Pivot Point with Maya Rockeymoore. I'd like to also thank our sponsor, the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare, and our show's producer, Peter James Callahan. Please join us every Sunday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time on weactradio.com or 1480 a.m. if you live in Washington, D.C. Until next time, America.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.
I speak from Pennsylvania's death row.
A bright, shiny, highly mechanized hell.
Mumia Abu-Jamal is one of the lost souls of the revolution.
And they're trying to figure out how to shut him down entirely.
They have moved heaven and earth to stop his voice being heard in the United States.
When you talk about groups that are maligned and slurred as terrorists in the major media, they're really small fry. They're retail terrorists. of the United States government.
The whole problem is really the blacks. The key is to devise a system that recognizes this while not appearing to.
On the move. This is Mumia Abu-Jamal.
Hi, I'm Tom Morello. Some call me the Night Watchman. In the case of Mumia Abu-Jamal is at a crucial stage. Please go to freemumia.com to find out more information about how you can help Mumia Abu-Jamal and other political prisoners. Night Watchman out.
Hello, my name is Jim Gray, and I am a judge of the Superior Court in California and a former federal prosecutor in Los Angeles. I would like to talk to you for a moment about marijuana. Did you know that since the federal government first banned marijuana in 1937, usage in this country has actually gone up by about 4,000%? Or did you know that in the Netherlands, where adults are allowed to possess small amounts of marijuana and buy it from government-regulated businesses, fewer adults and fewer teenagers smoke marijuana than here in our country? Or that an American is arrested on marijuana charges every 38 seconds? If you are wondering if any of this makes sense, you are not alone. To find out more, contact the Marijuana Policy Project at 1-877-JOIN-MPP or visit them on the web at mpp.org. Thank you, and good luck to us all.
Yo, George Dr. Funkenstein Clinton saying you're listening to We Act Radio. They do the dog, y'all.
Sometimes I get a good feeling, yeah. Get a good feeling, yeah. Oh, sometimes I get a good feeling, yeah. I get a feeling that I never had before. No, I get a good feeling, yeah.
Welcome to Moms Rising Radio on the We Act Radio Network. I'm your host, Kristen Rao Finkbeiner. We have a great show for you today. In fact, we're covering a wide variety of issues, from victories to challenges, from the death penalty to taking on Disney, from looking at how women's voices, women's contributions, and women's needs can and will be reflected in immigration policy reform, to looking at the impact of the U.S. Senate vote against background checks for all gun purchases and what that did to those politicians who voted against that bill, which 90% of Americans support, in terms of their likability ratings in their own districts. Is that vote going to make people unable to be reelected? We'll find out on this show. Thank